Welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time is it where you are. Thank you so much for joining this little presentation. As usual, I'm the weird guy, that annoying guy that talks about designing a developer-centric summit, but that's what it is. This presentation is about the importance of white space, and I decided to do this little presentation. It's more of I'm going to show some examples related to Thunderbird, but mostly it's about like a higher level of how to improve some interface by adding some negative space, because a lot of the times, pretty much 99% of the times, that when we change something on Thunderbird, the first feedback that I get, it's almost always, you're blowing up things. You're making things too big, too large. I cannot see all the things that I was able to see before. You're removing information, all this kind of like all the same feedback that are related to mostly the same problem. So in this presentation, we're gonna see how we can drastically improve the usability of Thunderbird by carefully implementing negative space, and why we're doing this. What are the technical reasons why? First of all, what is white space? White space technically should be called negative space, which is literally the empty area between screen elements, between sections, buttons, text, and everything that it's inside an interface. Obviously, it doesn't have to be white. Background color is generally called white space because that's the first thing that we refer to when we think of an empty area on a white sheet of paper and stuff like that, but can be any color. And there are different types of white spaces, not just one. It was identified in 4 different major types. Like the first one is the active white space, which is the intentional white space that as designers or developers, we add in between each element. So the space between buttons, the space between borders, the space between 2 different sections. This is our active white space. Then we have to deal with some passive white space, which is what comes naturally from the elements that we use. Every font has its own, every font comes with its own space, default space between letters. That's a passive white space that of course we can control with kerning and other attributes, but also logos or icons. Most of the times they come with a resolution that has some white space around the actual content of the logo of the icon. That's sometimes, and most of the time, the passive white space, it's ignored. We kind of inherit what comes from the elements that we use, and it's most of the times it doesn't affect much the interface. Then we have a third variation, that is the macro white space, which is literally the large areas, the large space between major layout elements. So for example, if you have few elements in the folder panes, the bottom area of the folder pane in Thunderbird is completely blank. That's a macro white space. The message pane, when you don't have anything selected and it doesn't show up, the welcome to Thunderbird and the donation funnel, that's completely blank. That's a macro white space area that we use to separate sections. And then of course we have the micro white space, which is mostly used and focused on content legibility. And it's basically mostly the spacing between lines of a paragraph, or the separation between a header and the footer, like the header and the first line of the paragraph, to improve speed and comprehension. These are like the 4 main areas where white space is used in a design. Why is it so important? That's a question that a lot of users ask, like, why do we need to spread things around? We cannot have everything together so I can see everything all at once. First of all, it's very important because we need to guide the user to focus where it matters. If we have an interface that it's full of everything, that it has all the elements there and everything is attached together, yes, you can see all together at once, but it's very cluttered. It's over-designed, and it translates to very poor productivity because you see everything all at once. There's no rhythm. We cannot guide the user attention on most important content, and we cannot highlight the most interactive areas that should stand out. Everything blends together and it's just a mess. And also it's easy on the brain. A clean, empty, white interface is way easier to digest than a cluttered. And I like these analogy that a cluttered design is like a cluttered desk. You can stand by your argument that I know where things are because I can see them all on your desk, all the little notes and papers. But at the end of the day, you will always end up losing the receipt that you swear it was just right there. And that's what happens in an interface. You can have everything visible all at once, everything squished together, and you can see this is my environment. I love it. I'm used to use it and I know where things are, but you will always spend time in looking for the button or looking for the link that you don't click that often, or looking for that action that you don't remember what it is because you're not, you don't need to use it every day. And that's very bad for productivity. It forces your brain to process all the time. Every time you see an interface, you need to basically inspect the interface constantly in order to find things. Instead, with the white space, we can make it easier for you and make it more digestible and easy to understand without you actively focusing on trying to decipher the interface. This is a beautiful quote that someone said, and I find it online, but I don't know who said it originally. But white space in design composition is the same as silence in a musical composition. Without a proportionate use of silence, the music is unstructured. Some may call it even a noise. Similarly, without white space, design is unstructured and difficult to consume. These are some very standard examples. We're going through like 2 or 3 different examples, and you can find these online. This is nothing groundbreaking or nothing that I actually did. I looked around. There are a lot of these very nice list of do's and don'ts in UI design, how with just simply adding white space and removing clutter, we can improve the readability and usability of an interface. This is a very classic example that just simply implements line height on a paragraph and shows how this is more digestible, more readable. And already here we can have the argument that, okay, but in this scenario, I can have 2 paragraphs with the same line height, and I can have way more information. In this one, I'm forced, in this box, I'm forced to have just 1 single paragraph, so less information that I can digest. But that's a non-argument because this is absolutely madness. And it doesn't matter how much more text you can fit in the same area, this is not usable. This is not readable. You're going to have a very hard time. You need to really focus your eye on every single letter. And it's very challenging and demanding on your brain. You're going to get tired of having an interface this way. Even if you have less information, this is faster and more productive to use. Another example of implementing white space for readability is dividing sections and areas to improve the rhythm and separate content. So we have here the heading and subheading that they belong to the same section, so the same group. So we can separate it from the first line of the paragraph, and we can improve the line height, and we have the same amount of content and we occupy way more space than before. And some user might say, oh, this won't fit in my screen. It doesn't matter. You can always scroll and you can always see the rest of the content, but this way you can digest it faster. You can read it faster. You're more productive, even if at first it doesn't seem like it because, oh, there's more, it doesn't fit in my interface, it's too big, but it's way better than dealing with this stuff, even if you see it all at once. There's also another thing with white space, that removing white space actually, so squishing things together, like attaching elements together, it's better, and we need to be careful on how to use it because, for example, in this way, in this example, you could think, oh, this is a good use of white space because there's a good rhythm, there's a good separation between elements, but this is actually wrong because in this way, our brain cannot automatically understand which label belongs to which input. And we have to go the extra mile. We have to do these extra brain exercise in the background without realizing that, oh, the first label belongs to the first input and so on. And if you need to pick something, it's very hard because the space is always the same. In this way, by removing white space, so attaching elements together, we are automatically grouping 2 elements together, and we're telling our brain that these 2 things, they belong together without the necessity of putting a box around it or putting a border to separate or having extra white space to better separate things. So Also, removing white space, it's very important. We need to be careful when we want to group things together visually. Um, this is another example that can be easily applied to our interface. This is a very simple list where we have like few elements and we have a search bar, a title, and some actionable buttons. And this is what we kind of do right now in Thunderbird. Every time we have a long list, not every time, like sometimes, especially in previous sections, when we have a long list, we use a border to separate. Then if we have extra things, for example, a search button that doesn't, a search field that doesn't belong to the list, we put it in an extra container. We use a background color for the container, and then we use a border for the search. And then the footer of these whole area, it's also this one separated by a border. And this is okay. I'd say this is usable and it might be good, but you can see how we have very few information. We have just 5 fields, 5 actually, 5 type of content that the user should focus on. And this is very, very cluttered. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of elements. If we clean it up and we remove the borders, we use better white space, and we use simple background colors, background variations to separate the elements, this is way more digestible. All of a sudden, we have the focus of our attention, it's on the text. It's not anymore on the interface. We focus solely on the text because everything else, it's gone and it's easier to digest. We focus on the text and we focus on the buttons. And by using simple background variation, we can have a better rhythm on this interface without using so many elements. And this solution is also easier to style for themes variation, for dark mode variation, because we have to deal with less elements, with less design elements, and everything feels, there's more breathing room. And as usual, we have extra space. We have the same amount of information, but in a larger container. And it's not too bad. We just add 20, 30 pixels more, and this is way more digestible for our brain. It's way more natural to digest this section than the previous one. Moving on, this is a quote that I get pretty much all the time, every day. A lot of users say, this is just a fancy trend that you're following, and it represents everything that is wrong with modern design and flat, boring UI. And the short answer is no, absolutely no. This is a shortcoming of a lot of users that are used to use that the old interface. And this is something that we shouldn't dismiss immediately. When a user complains about this, we shouldn't dismiss the user by saying, oh, no, you're wrong, that's it, it's fine. We need to realize why the user is against it and what we can do to help him to transition to this new interface. So the first main reason is familiarity and muscle memory. Of course, if you're used to use the same interface for 10 plus years, and then all of a sudden the interface changes, you cannot use your muscle memory anymore. You need to rewire your brain to understand the new interface, to get familiar with the new interface. And even if we are able to make it more usable, more digestible, breaking the action, breaking the daily actions that the user was used to do, it's very disruptive. And these causes a feeling of learning a new software, even if you're using the same software. This is very annoying. And I totally get it. I totally understand. It feels like I'm using the same software. Why I need to relearn it again? And another main reasons, unfortunately, is that we come from years and years of oversaturated and cluttered design. Up until 10 years ago, 15 years ago, UI design and web design, all these interfaces were pretty much an explosion of colors. We had a million different animated GIFs. We have different fonts. We used to have websites made in Comic Sans with rainbow animated GIFs of titles and all these other like extra crazy things. And that's the type of interface that the majority of us have grown up to use. And so we are used to that type of very saturated and cluttered interface. Everything inside the boxes, every button is inside a border that has like a emboss interface, and everything. It's very it comes into your face. Like it's very in your face. It's very disruptive, and um, we grew up with that type of interface. So having this new type of trend, this new type of design is very disruptive. And another main argument that a lot of users use is that I need to see everything every time at all cost. This is something that it's very important for a lot of users. The fact that they need to see all the information. If we use the white space to spread the information around to create a better rhythm, that's very detrimental for them. And I would argue that all of these things, like the first three things, are normal whenever you use a new thing. Like whenever, even like you're used to use your old car for 10 years, 20 years, and then you buy a new car, you're going to have probably a week of settling into the new console, the new dashboard, and then on all the other new things. And that's pretty normal. The third point, it's unfortunately, it's how things are. It's how, when the web started, there wasn't like, we didn't have many analysis on how using a mouse or using a keyboard, on how interface design and usability researches were structure to actually help the user. So things are evolving. The web is still kind of young, and using a computer with these interfaces, we're still in kind of an early stages, and we're still learning, we're still evolving. So these changes are expected and normal. The last one is something that I strongly argue against it. And it's something that we're used to, but it's something very wrong, because it's detrimental to our productivity. And we can see an example here. This is something that we were used to use. This is an exaggeration, of course, but you remember when all the browsers, Firefox, Netscape, or even Internet Explorer allowed to use toolbars. Like every time you install a product, then all of a sudden you had your Google toolbar, Yahoo toolbar, or any other like million different malware toolbars. And then this was Microsoft Word version 97, if I'm not wrong. And this was the interface that you needed to deal with if you needed to see everything at all time. And can you see how very challenging and very demanding and very tiring is this type of interface? It feels like you're running up a flight of stairs and you cannot stop. And every time you need to pick a tool, you need to basically re uh, analyze the interface from the get-go. And we were used to use these sort of like flashy colors, other than because of the technical limitation of the number of bits that we were able to use. But we were using these flashy colors because it was the only way to uh, uh, catch the attention of the user. You can see here, every tool is separated by a border, there's a container, and then we have these sort of like uh, three-dimensional type of UI elements to make it pop out or emboss it, and everything is just a mess. And also Microsoft learned these things. This is a screenshot of Microsoft Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365, how they like to call it now. You can see the interface, how it's way cleaner and way easier and way more understandable, how they removed all those extra borders, extra containers, how by grouping things, how removing horizontal spacing, you understand that these belong to the same group, and adding vertical space, you understand that these belong to another group. How they separated things, they created more breathing room. And yes, there's the argument that user might say, okay, but now I have to click around and find it and try to understand where things are. Instead, before I was able to see everything together. And that's just going to be normal for the first couple of times that you use something. After you're used to use this new interface, you will develop a new muscle memory. You will see and you will find things more intuitively, and it won't strain your brain. You will not feel tired after using the type of interface, and you will find things way easier. You will be faster and more productive. Um, so how we can apply this concept to Thunderbird? This is a screenshot of a kind of like a standard Thunderbird situation when you have a lot of folders, you have a lot of messages, and you can see already here, it feels very cluttered. There's no much rhythm here that we can easily identify without focusing on a specific section. All the folders here, they kind of blend all together, and we're forced to use the zebra background coloring to create better separation. There's more attention to the icons than to the actual text. All these, the only macro white space here is the message pane, but only because we don't have any message selected. And when we are in this situation that all the text and we have hundreds of email, we are forced to actually focus on each single line and read everything. It's not easy to quickly scroll through all these emails and quickly read them because they're all squished together. There's no much breathing room. There's no space. I have the same feeling as the word interface where I'm running and I cannot stop because I'm out of breath, and that's what it feels. So let's analyze and do a little simple prototyping exercise. For example, if we take as an example the folder pane, this is the situation that we might have, and I removed a couple of entries because of personal names, so apologies for this pixelated thing. But if we analyze this situation here, you can see all the problems that we have. As I said, we are forced to use a zebra background coloring just to improve the separation between different items. The size and the space between the icons and the text is not enough, and they kind of like merge together in one single entity. Even if it's not important for the user doesn't need to have these all together. The focus should be the text. And everything is very squishy. Yes, we can see all the folders all together, but always remember that your focal point of your eye, it's a few inches. If you're focused on this area, everything around is blurry. So you're not actually reading everything. You have these misconception of being able to see everything at once, but you still have to actually focus on things. And the fact that when you focus on something, because these other elements are so tied together, you're also reading these other two subconsciously. It's very distracting. It's very demanding for your brain. So an exercise that we might do, it's with implementing the, this is prototype that I did before implementing the new folder icon. So it's slightly different, but it's similar in a way. You can see here how all these elements are more readable because we improved the vertical white space, we improved the separation, we divided the folders from the text, so we don't ask the user to treat these as a single unit and read everything together. The focus is on the text itself. And we also improved the vertical spacing between sections, because now we know, without even thinking about it, that these, thanks to, of course, the indentation, but also the vertical spaces, doesn't belong to the same layer, doesn't belong to the same level. It's completely separated. It's easier to select. And when you focus on one thing, you are more focused on reading the thing without the distraction on everything that it's so squished in. We can remove the zebra coloring because we don't need it now to separate. And in this situation, we have 32 items. In this one, we have 28 items in total for the same height. So we are only removing 4 items from the entire interface, but this is way more digestible, way easier on the brain, and way less overwhelming. This type of solution is very overwhelming. If you continue, we can apply the same concept to the message pane. Also, this is kind of maybe something that everyone has right now, and we are right now, as our solution with the 3 items, we are basically telling the user, okay, you can control your own white space, which is not wrong, but it's not even an optimal default solution. We're asking the user to resize these columns to fit their needs the best, but we can offer better default solutions. And here it's very read to quickly identify which message I should read and which message is the one that I'm looking for because I need to read every single one. If we do the same type of exercise and we add more space, we use different font size and font weight to grab the focus on specific sections. So we increase by 1-2 pixel the sender name, we increase by 1-2 pixel the title, and then we use an excerpt of the first paragraph with different coloring, and then we use a large, like a macro white space, to push all the extra informations that are not immediately necessary to the right, and we write align numbers. This is way more digestible. You can immediately focus on the number, on the date of receiving. You can identify immediately the subject without the confusion of all of these. And in this situation, we have 9 items, and here in the same height of this container, we have 6 items. So yes, we're losing 3 items, but reading these, it's way slower than reading these. So you have less items, but you can scroll through them way faster because it's easier to identify and to look for what you're looking for. This is the final example, and then I'm gonna shut up. I promise. We're almost at the end. Another thing that we're doing right now, we're using the status bar, which is kind of a strange concept, especially the way we use it. It's kind of strange. We have the online indicator that now is different. It's a new one, but this is 68. We list the messages of what happened before, like if we have new messages, we just deleted some, or if we go and roll over on a link, we use these massive, like this massive macro white space area to list all those information. And then we have these unread, total, and the today pane. And because we need these extra area, all of these are squished together. And because they're so squished together, we need to use borders. So you can see a box, another box, another box. And also we have this solution here, which is very, very strange. We're using a toolbar button inside a container. When we go and roll over, there's another border of the toolbar button inside another border of the container. And we list the date number in here, which is very unusual, all the way to the bottom. And all this information are also out of context. They don't belong to the same context of the folders and messages that we have completely to the left. So if we do a little bit of exercise and we implement white space and we restructure these interface, we can completely drop the status bar by also saving these extra height to list more information. So if, for example, we grab the unread and total count, and we put it in the same folder pane just at the bottom. And we don't need to separate these. This is like a simple experiment of using a gradient to separate this, but we can use a border, or we can use just simply blank space to properly separate the end of the folders and the beginning of the information. We're gonna have here the online icon that, of course, the new one is different. It was an old design. We can list the total and read number of messages that now belong to the same context, because we're seeing the folders and then we have a counter that belong to the same context of the folders and messages. We can list extra messages down there, and because we are using extra space, we don't need to use borders and different backgrounds and not even the column here. We can just write everything in line and use spacing and different colors variation to have a better rhythm. Same thing for the today pane, the calendar. For example, these, like, ignore this for now, it's just an experiment, don't worry. But if we have the top of the today pane here for the calendar, and you can close it to collapse it, we can use that extra space. We can actually use the collapsed today pane to have this vertical toolbar, which lists all the information that are collapsed. So we can still show a little preview of the current day and the date of today. And we can also, through white space, we can list other actionable buttons. So if the user just is interested to immediately open the reminders, or immediately open the tasks, or immediately open the calendar without going at the bottom, clicking the today pane and changing the location, or changing the view of the today pane, you can immediately do it. And this doesn't feel cluttered because there's enough space around to understand that all these sections are separate section. They belong to the same grouping because they're all kind of close together in the same area, but it's easier to digest and it's easy to understand. And we can completely get rid of the status bar and save more space and having less clutter and less confusion in our interface. As usual, we're always working on it. Nothing is set in stone, nothing is absolutely the way it is. We're evolving, we are going through iterations, and we are improving things. We're gradually implementing these improvements because we don't want, of course, create that sense of disruption and pulling the rug underneath you because, of course, you've been using Thunderbird for many years and drastic UI interfaces and changes are terrible. Just remember what from Windows 7 to Windows 8, what happened, like a complete rewrite of the interface that was just atrocious. And then they went back with Windows 10 trying to do a merge of the two, but it wasn't very good because it was too drastic, way too drastic. Another important thing to consider is that we're conducting usability tests on new sections. So whenever we implement something new and we have the budget for it, we do usability tests to understand if a new section that we implemented with the new UI, these new elements, is usable, is understandable for the user. And also a very important thing is that we're taking these decisions and we're doing these changes based on studies and researches. We're not doing all of this just from personal taste. A lot of feedback that I get is that, oh, you're doing this because, yes, it looks cute, it looks pretty, but it's useless. No, of course it looks cute, it looks pretty, because we want to have a pretty interface, but that's not our objective. That's not what we're doing. We're using the studies and researches of evolving usability and accessibility researches to improve Thunderbird. And as usual, at the end of the day, let's work together to make Thunderbird the best email client ever. Thank you so much. This is the end of my presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much, Alessandro.
Oh,
Let's
welcome.
see if we have any questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any posted in the chat.
Mm-hmm. I was expecting this. This is kind of normal. This is more of a non-question type of presentation.
I'll give everybody one last moment to either post their questions or you can just speak them out. Oh, I see one. Linux Magic, do you want to read your question?
Just a really quick question. We still have, of course, people with smaller tablets, etc., who might choose to use Thunderbird. And of course, nobody likes a screen real estate where you can only see 3 messages in the message list. Although I like everything you're talking about, and I really am impressed with you thinking about how the human brain works, how do you address the cases between smaller real estate versus more modern real estate?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question and the feedback. I really appreciate. Yes, it's tricky. It's very tricky, and that's why we're trying to carefully implement the white space to not actually like blow up the entire interface. As you saw in the presentation, whenever I was updating a section, I was saying, okay, here we're removing only 3 extra rows. We're not removing like 20. Also, one thing that we're considering, and I didn't put in the presentation because it's just a thought, it wasn't prototype or anything, we're considering different type of what's the word, I'm blanking. I'm gonna open Firefox and see. Firefox has these in the customizer density. That's the word I was looking for. We are considering to enable different type of density in the interface because, as you said, there are some users that they still have small, like 11 inches laptops that they have 124, like 1024 by 726 pixels of real estate. So it's very, very small. And also we want to keep of course, the options that we have right now to allow the user to collapse sections that it doesn't need to see. So we want to update the interface by carefully not blowing it up, but making it more usable, and probably implement custom density for those users that need it. Thanks for the question.
Any further questions? It doesn't look like it. Okay, Alessandro, thank you so much. I'm going to give you the little bit of applause that I can. There you go.
Thank you.
Guys. Yeah, I really appreciated this, and I think that this was just an excellent talk, and it definitely was
Thank you.
grabbing. Like I was just glued to the screen the whole time. So
oh, wow.
very good. Yeah.